The forest had always been Lyra's sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a graveyard. She moved through the undergrowth with practiced silence, her worn basket clutched against her chest as twilight bled into darkness. The autumn air bit at her exposed skin, making her pull her threadbare shawl tighter. She shouldn't be out this late. Omegas weren't supposed to venture beyond the village boundaries after sunset, especially not alone, especially not her. But Kai's fever had spiked again, and old Marin had run out of moonbell flowers. Her little brother needed medicine, and the rules of their pack meant nothing compared to his labored breathing and fever-bright eyes. Just a little further, Lyra whispered to herself, stepping over a rotting log. The moonbells grew near the old standing stones, where the forest grew thick and wild, where decent pack members never went. Then again, she wasn't considered decent by most standards. The snap of a branch froze her in place. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the darkening woods. Wolves hunted at night. Real wolves, not shifters, massive predators that could tear through flesh and bone. She'd seen what they left behind once, and the memory still woke her in cold sweats. Another sound, closer, a low, rasping breath that didn't belong to any animal she knew. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Lyra's feet moved toward the sound instead. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the healer's gift her grandmother claimed ran in their blood, that pull toward suffering that she could never quite ignore. What she found made her drop her basket. A man lay crumpled at the base of an ancient oak, half hidden in the shadows. Even unconscious and broken, he was enormous, easily 7 feet of solid muscle and raw power. His clothes, what remained of them, had once been fine. Black leather and dark fabric, now shredded and soaked with blood. So much blood. Merciful gods, Lyra breathed, stumbling forward. She fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uselessly over his body. Where did she even start? Gashes crisscrossed his chest and arms, deep enough that she could see bone in places. His face, brutally handsome even in its battered state, was pale beneath its tan. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. He was dying. Right here. Right now. This man was dying. Lyra pressed trembling fingers to his throat, searching for a pulse. There. Faint and irregular. But there. Up close she could smell him beneath the copper tang of blood. Pine and winter frost and something else. Something that made her instincts curl with awareness. Alpha. This man was an alpha, and a powerful one. "What happened to you?" she whispered. His chest and left shoulder bore the worst wounds, 3 parallel gashes that looked like claw marks, extending from his collarbone down across his pectoral. But as Lyra leaned closer, her healer's eye caught something wrong. The edges of the wounds weren't bleeding clean. They were black. The flesh around them mottled with dark veins that spread like poisoned roots across his skin. She'd never seen anything like it. Lyra's hands moved on instinct, ripping strips from her already tattered skirt to press against the bleeding wounds. He needed a real healer, someone with training and supplies. He needed his pack, wherever they were. He needed more than a poor Omega with nothing but determination and moonbell flowers. But he had her, and that would have to be enough. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do you hear me? You don't get to die in my forest." A low groan escaped his lips, and his eyes flickered open. Lyra gasped. They were gold. Not hazel or light brown, but pure molten gold, glowing faintly in the darkness like embers. And they fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. He tried to speak, but only a wet cough emerged, flecking his lips with blood. His hand, massive and scarred, lifted slightly toward her, trembling with effort. "Shh, don't try to talk," Lyra said, gently pushing his hand back down. Save your strength. Those fierce eyes tracked her movement, and something flickered in their depths. Recognition? Confusion? She couldn't tell. Then his gaze dropped to where her hand rested on his chest, right over his heart, and his entire body went rigid. A sound rumbled from deep in his throat, a warning growl that no human should be able to make. Lyra snatched her hand back, fear spiking through her. "I'm trying to help you," she said quickly. "I'm not going to hurt you." His eyes rolled back, and he went limp again, consciousness fleeing. "No, no, no." Lyra pressed harder on the wounds, feeling his life seeping between her fingers. He was too heavy to carry, too far from the village for her to get help in time. The black veins spreading from his wounds were growing darker, creeping further across his chest with every passing moment. Poison. It had to be poison, and she knew only one thing that might help. Lyra's hands shook as she reached for the small leather pouch hidden in her bodice, the one she never showed anyone, the one that held her greatest secret and her most dangerous inheritance. Inside were 3 dried petals of silver leaf, a flower so rare and so powerful that possessing it was forbidden for someone of her station. Her grandmother had given it to her years ago with a whispered warning. "Only in the darkest need, child, and never let them see what you can do." This was the darkest need. Lyra crushed one petal between her palms, feeling the familiar warmth building in her chest, the gift her grandmother spoke of, the healing magic that marked her as different, as other, as dangerous. She'd spent years hiding it, tamping it down, pretending she was nothing more than a weak omega good for menial labor. But this man would die if she didn't use it now. She pressed her glowing palms against his chest and shoulder, directly over the poisoned wounds, and let the power flow. Light bloomed beneath her hands, soft and silver white, illuminating the clearing. The stranger's body arched beneath her touch, another inhuman sound tearing from his throat. The black veins recoiled from her magic like living things, writhing and twisting as her power burned them away. "Come on," Lyra gritted out, sweat beading on her forehead. "Fight it. Fight." The poison fought back. She could feel it resisting, a malevolent presence trying to consume both the man beneath her hands and the magic flowing into him. It was stronger than anything she'd encountered before, darker, more concentrated. What could create such a thing? Her power pushed harder, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, the black veins began to recede. The wounds stopped bleeding. Color returned to his ashen face. But the effort was costing her. Lyra felt her strength draining away like water through cupped hands, felt the world starting to tilt and spin around her. She'd never pushed her gift this far, never tried to combat something so purely malevolent. "Just a little more," she told herself through gritted teeth. "Just hold on a little longer." Finally, mercifully, the last of the black veins faded. The poison was gone, burned away by her power. Lyra slumped forward, exhausted, her hands still pressed to his now steady chest. The glow faded, leaving only moonlight and shadows. Her head spun, and she could taste copper in her mouth from the effort. Every muscle in her body trembled with exhaustion. But he was breathing easier now. The death rattle was gone from his lungs. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. A twig snapped in the darkness behind her. Lyra's head whipped around, her heart dropping into her stomach. Through the trees, she could see torchlight, hear voices calling out in the distinctive cadence of the pack's patrol. "Tracks lead this way. Smell blood. Find whoever's stupid enough to be out after dark." Terror seized her. If they found her here with this stranger, with evidence of magic still humming in the air, they'd know what she'd done. And the penalty for an Omega using forbidden magic was death. Lyra looked down at the unconscious man. She couldn't leave him here to be found by the patrol. Something told her he was in danger too, that whoever had poisoned him might still be hunting. And after saving his life, she felt responsible for keeping him alive. Foolish, reckless, dangerous. But she'd made her choice. "This is going to hurt," she whispered to the stranger, carefully tucking the remaining 2 silver leaf petals back into her bodice. "I'm sorry." Lyra grabbed his arms and pulled, dragging his considerable weight inch by painful inch. Her body wasn't meant for this kind of labor, but desperation gave her power she didn't know she possessed. The voices grew closer, the torchlight brighter. Her arms screamed in protest. Her back felt like it might snap. But she kept pulling, kept moving, her feet slipping on the forest floor as she hauled him backward. She pulled him behind the massive oak, into the hollow space between its ancient roots. Then she grabbed fallen branches and armfuls of leaves, covering them both as best she could. Just as she pressed herself against his side, hardly daring to breathe, the patrol emerged into the clearing. "Nothing here but blood," one voice growled. "Lots of it. Could be a wolf kill, or bandits. Either way, not our concern. Come on, we need to check the northern boundary before." Lyra held perfectly still, her face pressed against the stranger's shoulder. His scent filled her nose, that winter frost and pine, now mixed with her own healing magic and something else, something that made her nature respond with primal recognition. "Mine," something deep inside her whispered. "Protect what's mine." The thought terrified her. She didn't even know this man. He could be anyone. A criminal, a rogue, a danger to her and everything she loved. But the bond she felt growing between them with every heartbeat, strengthened by the magic she'd poured into him, was undeniable. The patrol's voices faded, their torchlight disappearing into the forest. Lyra waited until she could no longer hear them before allowing herself to breathe properly. The stranger remained unconscious, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm beneath her cheek. In the darkness of their hiding place, she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the strength still coiled in his muscles even in rest. She should leave him here now that the immediate danger had passed, should go home to Kai and forget this night ever happened. But when she tried to pull away, the stranger's hand shot up, catching her wrist in an iron grip. Lyra froze as those amber eyes opened again, lucid this time, intelligent and sharp despite his injuries. They locked onto her face with an intensity that stole her breath. He pulled her closer with surprising strength, his gaze dropping to her neck, to the place where an omega's mating gland lay just beneath the skin. She felt him inhale deeply, breathing in her scent. The growl that rumbled from his chest wasn't threatening this time. It was possessive, claiming, full of dark promise. Then he spoke, his voice rough as gravel and thick with an accent she didn't recognize. "Mine." The word hung between them like a verdict. Before Lyra could respond, before she could process what he meant or what it meant for her, his eyes rolled back and he collapsed into unconsciousness again, his hand falling away from her wrist. Lyra sat there in the darkness, her heart racing, her skin tingling where he'd touched her. Her body still trembled from the magical exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that made even sitting upright difficult. What had she done? She looked down at the mysterious stranger with his fierce gaze and poisoned wounds, at the man who'd just claimed her with a single word, and realized with crystal clarity that her life had just changed forever. The only question now was whether she'd survive it. But first, she had to get him somewhere safe. And in her current state, barely able to keep her own eyes open, that seemed nearly impossible. Still, Lyra forced herself to move. She couldn't stay here until morning. The patrol might return. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, she began the agonizing process of dragging him again, heading toward the one place she knew they might have a chance. Home. Getting the stranger back to her cottage was like trying to move a mountain with bare hands. Lyra had dragged him perhaps 20 feet before her arms gave out completely. She collapsed beside him, gasping, her muscles screaming in protest. The magical exhaustion made everything worse. Her limbs felt like lead, her vision kept blurring at the edges. Dawn was still hours away, but she couldn't stay here. The patrol made regular rounds, and there were worse things than pack guards in these woods after dark. "You have to wake up," she whispered urgently, shaking his shoulder. "Please, I can't do this alone." No response. His breathing remained steady but deep, lost in whatever darkness held him. Lyra looked toward the village, then back at the stranger. Her cottage sat on the very edge of the settlement, a deliberate isolation that had felt like exile, but now seemed like providence. If she could just get him there, if she could keep him hidden for a few days until he healed enough to leave. She was still trying to convince herself this was a good idea when his eyes opened again. Those molten amber irises found hers immediately, and this time there was clarity in them, sharp intelligence despite the pain that tightened his features. He assessed her in a single glance, her threadbare clothes, her small frame, the exhaustion written across her face, then looked around at the forest surrounding them. His body tensed, muscles coiling as if to spring up. "Don't," Lyra said quickly, pressing a hand to his chest. "You'll tear open the wounds. They're barely closed as it is." He stared at her hand, then at her face, and spoke in that same unfamiliar accent. "Where?" Just one word, but Lyra understood. Blackwater territory, near the eastern border. She paused, studying his reaction. Do you know where you are? What happened to you?" His jaw clenched, something dark flickering across his features. Instead of answering, he tried to sit up. "I said don't," Lyra began, but he was already moving. She watched in amazement as he forced his broken body upright through sheer willpower, his face going white with pain, but not making a sound. When he swayed, she instinctively moved to support him, pressing against his side. The moment she touched him, he went completely still. Lyra felt it too, a jolt of awareness that raced down her spine, making her instincts flare to life. His scent wrapped around her, stronger now that he was conscious, and beneath the blood and forest dirt was something that called to her in a way nothing ever had. "I need to get you somewhere safe," she said, her voice unsteady. "Can you walk if I help you?" He looked down at her, and for a moment, something almost like amusement crossed his face. She barely reached his chest even when he was sitting down. But then he nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Getting him to his feet took both of their efforts and more than a little creative maneuvering. He leaned heavily on her, probably more than he wanted to, his pride evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. But he didn't have a choice, and neither did she. They moved through the forest like two wounded animals, slow and painful. Every few yards he needed to stop, his breathing harsh, sweat beading on his forehead. But he never complained, never spoke except for occasional words in that strange language she didn't understand. "Almost there," Lyra kept whispering, as much for herself as for him. "Just a little further." When her cottage finally came into view, a small ramshackle structure that leaned slightly to one side, she nearly wept with relief. No lights showed in the nearby houses. Everyone was still asleep. Thank the gods. The stranger's weight nearly took them both down as they climbed the 2 steps to her door. Lyra fumbled with the latch, half carrying him inside, and immediately shut and barred the door behind them. Her cottage was a single room, a bed in one corner, a hearth in another, a small table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with herbs and healing supplies. It smelled of dried flowers and wood smoke, familiar and safe. The stranger's eyes swept the space with that same sharp assessment, cataloging everything. When his gaze landed on the small cot in the corner where Kai slept, his entire body tensed. "My brother," Lyra said quickly. "He's just a child. He won't wake up. He's sick with fever." The stranger studied the small, feverish form for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Some of the tension left his shoulders, as if reassured that the child posed no threat. Lyra helped him toward her own bed. There was nowhere else, and he collapsed onto it with barely contained relief. The rope frame groaned under his weight, and she wondered briefly if it would hold. In the better light of her hearth, she could finally see him properly. He was beautiful in a brutal, dangerous way. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. His black hair was long enough to brush his shoulders, matted with blood and dirt. Scars crisscrossed his visible skin, old wounds that spoke of a violent life. But it was his eyes that held her. Even now, fighting pain and exhaustion, they burned with an intensity that made her want to look away and step closer at the same time. "I need to clean your wounds properly," Lyra said, moving toward her supply shelves, "and check that the poison is really gone." She gathered what she needed: clean cloths, water from her barrel, various herbs and tinctures. When she returned to the bedside, he was watching her with an unreadable expression. Lyra hesitated. "I'm going to need to. Your shirt is ruined anyway. May I?" He understood her meaning and, after a moment, reached for the tattered remains of his shirt. The movement made him wince, and she quickly moved to help, carefully peeling the blood-stiffened fabric away from his skin. What she revealed made her breath catch. His torso was a map of violence. The fresh wounds she'd treated, yes, but also dozens of old scars. Claw marks, blade cuts, what looked like burn marks. This was a man who'd been fighting his entire life. But more than that, she could see the evidence of his power. Even injured and weakened, his physique spoke of dominant alpha genetics, the kind of strength that came from pure bloodlines, not common pack stock. "Who are you?" she whispered. His intense stare met hers, and for a moment she thought he might answer. Instead, he reached up and caught her wrist. Not roughly, but firmly, and guided her hand to his chest, placing it directly over his heart. The same place she'd poured her healing magic into him. Lyra felt his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. Felt something else, too. A connection, a thread of power that linked them now, forged when she'd saved his life with forbidden magic. He spoke again, slower this time, as if testing the words. "Mine." "I don't understand," Lyra whispered. "I don't even know your name." He studied her for a long moment, seeming to gather his strength. When he spoke, it was careful, deliberate. "Theron." "Theron," she repeated, and something about the way his name felt on her tongue made her shiver. His thumb moved to trace her lower lip, watching the movement with predatory focus. The alpha presence radiating from him was overwhelming this close, making her nature scream warnings and invitations simultaneously. Then his gaze flickered down to her neck again, to that spot where her mating gland pulsed beneath the skin, and his expression darkened with want. Lyra pulled back quickly, her face flushing. "I need to clean your wounds," she said, her voice too high, "before infection sets in." If he was disappointed by her retreat, he didn't show it. He simply leaned back against her pillows and watched as she began her work. Cleaning him was torture of a different kind. Every touch of cloth to skin made him tense, muscles flexing beneath her hands. She tried to be clinical, professional, but it was impossible to ignore the heat of him, the way his heated gaze tracked her every movement, the barely audible sounds he made when she touched particularly sensitive areas. The 3 claw marks across his chest and shoulder were the worst. Even with her healing magic, they were deep and angry-looking. What did this? Lyra asked as she applied a poultice. What kind of claws leave poison behind? Theron's expression turned grim. He spoke several words in his language, harsh and angry sounding, then seemed to search for words she'd understand. Betrayal, he finally said. Ambush. Someone from your pack? His silence was answer enough. Lyra worked in quiet after that, focusing on each wound, each bruise. But as she did, she noticed something strange. The injuries were healing faster than they should, even with her magic. She'd seen accelerated healing in strong alphas before, but this was different. When she pressed her fingers gently around one of the gashes on his shoulder, checking for infection, her healer's sense caught something beneath his skin. A power, ancient and vast, coiled like a sleeping beast. Her hands stilled. You're not just an alpha? Theron's eyes opened, fixed on her face. There's something else in you, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. Something. More. For the first time, wariness crept into his expression. His hand shot out, catching her wrist again, this time with warning in his grip. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. What? You? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Because he'd felt it too, she realized. When she'd healed him, when their powers had touched, he'd sensed what she was hiding. I asked you first, Lyra said, trying for bravery she didn't feel. His grip tightened fractionally. He seemed to struggle for the right words. His grasp of her language still limited. Dangerous. Both. Then we're even, she whispered, because so am I. They stared at each other, two people with secrets that could get them killed, bound together by circumstance and magic, and something neither of them fully understood. A soft moan from the corner broke the tension. Kai stirred in his sleep, his small face flushed with fever. Lyra immediately pulled away from Theron, moving to her brother's side. She pressed a hand to his forehead and cursed softly. His fever's worse. She'd forgotten the moonbells. In the chaos of saving Theron, she'd left her basket in the forest. I need to go back out, she said, more to herself than Theron. The medicine he needs? I dropped it when I found you. No. Theron's voice was firm despite his weakness. Not. Safe. Patrols. He needs it, Lyra insisted, turning to face him. He's all I have. I won't lose him. Something shifted in Theron's expression at those words, some recognition of loss that she saw reflected in his amber eyes. He looked at the small figure in the cot, then back at her, and seemed to come to a decision. He spoke in his own language, several sentences that she couldn't understand, but whose tone was clear, a promise or a vow. Then he reached down and, with visible effort, removed something from his boot. A knife, small but wickedly sharp, with a handle wrapped in worn leather. He held it out to her. Lyra stared at the blade, understanding the gesture. Protection, trust. I don't know how to use that. Learn. Fast, he said, the words coming with effort. She took the knife, their fingers brushing. Again, that jolt of awareness, of connection. I'll be quick, she promised. There's water in the barrel if you're thirsty. Don't try to stand up. And if anyone comes, hide, he finished, glancing at the small space beneath her bed. A grim smile touched his lips at the absurdity of someone his size hiding anywhere. Lyra moved toward the door, then paused. Theron? He looked at her, those amber eyes alert despite his exhaustion. Thank you. His response was low, rough, filled with something that made her stomach flutter. Mine. Protect. The words followed her out into the pre-dawn darkness, settling into her bones like a brand. Lyra made it to the forest clearing where she'd found him, retrieved her scattered basket and the precious moonbells, and was halfway back when she heard the voices. Sure, the blood trail led this direction. Could have been dragged. Check for tracks dash dash. The patrol. Still searching. Lyra's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against a tree, hardly daring to breathe, as two guards passed within feet of her hiding spot. Whatever it was, it's gone now, one grumbled. Probably some rogue that crawled off to die. Or something dragged the body away. These woods aren't safe anymore. Not with... The voices faded as they moved on, but not before Lyra caught the edge of real fear in their tone. She waited until she was certain they'd gone before sprinting back to her cottage, her heart in her throat. Theron was exactly where she'd left him, though she could see tension in every line of his body. He relaxed fractionally when she came through the door, and she realized he'd been worried about her. "They're still searching," she whispered, barring the door again. "Looking for blood trails. Looking for you." His expression darkened. Not, "Stop." "Who won't? Who's hunting you?" But he'd already closed his eyes, his body demanding rest even as his mind clearly fought against it. Within moments, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Lyra quickly prepared Kai's medicine, getting the moonbell tincture down his throat. His fever would break by morning. She was certain of it. But as she sat there in the darkness, listening to two different patterns of breathing, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped into something far larger and more dangerous than a simple rescue. Theron had said betrayal, had said ambush. Someone had tried to kill him with poison that no ordinary wolf should possess. Someone had hurt him badly enough to leave him for dead. And now he was in her home, in her bed, calling her mine, with the certainty of an alpha who'd just found his mate. Lyra looked at her hands, still faintly tingling with residual magic, at the knife he'd given her, now tucked into her belt, at the massive stranger who'd somehow become her responsibility in a single night. "What have I gotten myself into?" she whispered into the darkness. As if in answer, Theron murmured something in his sleep, words she couldn't understand, but whose tone spoke of nightmares and old pain. Without thinking, Lyra moved to his side and gently brushed the hair back from his forehead. He quieted immediately at her touch, some of the tension leaving his face. Whatever happened next, whatever danger she'd invited into her life, she'd made her choice in that forest clearing. She just hoped they'd both survive it. The magical exhaustion finally caught up with her. Lyra settled into her chair beside the hearth, intending to keep watch, but her eyes grew heavy. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sound of Theron's steady breathing and the warmth of the fire on her face. Lyra woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Kai's laughter. She bolted upright from where she'd dozed off in her chair, her body protesting the awkward position. Pale morning light streamed through the gaps in her shutters. She must have slept for a few hours at least, and there, impossibly, Theron sat on the floor beside Kai's cot, showing her little brother something with his hands. "Mama!" Kai's face was bright, his fever clearly broken. "Look! He's teaching me shadow animals." Lyra stared in disbelief. The man who could barely stand last night was now making shadow puppets on the wall, his massive hands creating the shape of a wolf that seemed almost alive in its movement. Kai was entranced, giggling as the shadow wolf chased a shadow rabbit across the stone. "You should be resting," Lyra said, her voice rough with sleep. Theron's amber gaze met hers, and something warm flickered in their depths. He spoke slowly, clearly working hard at her language. "Boy. Woke. Scared. Needed. Distraction." His accent was thick, his grammar fractured, but he was trying, speaking her language despite obvious difficulty. And Kai, bless him, showed no fear of the enormous stranger, perhaps sensing Theron's gentleness or simply trusting his sister's judgment. Kai tugged on Theron's sleeve with the fearlessness of childhood. Are you Mama's mate? She's never had a mate before. The others say she's too strange, but I think she's perfect. Are you going to stay? Kai! Lyra's face burned. That's not... We don't... But Theron was looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. Yes, he said simply, the word carrying conviction despite his limited vocabulary. Stay. The single word carried the weight of a vow. Before Lyra could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them all freeze. Lyra? A woman's voice, familiar and unwelcome. I know you're in there. Open up. Theron was on his feet instantly, moving with a speed that shouldn't be possible for someone so injured. He positioned himself between the door and Kai, his entire body radiating lethal intent. Lyra pressed a finger to her lips, then pointed frantically toward the small storage space behind her herb shelves. Theron hesitated, clearly hating the idea of hiding, but another knock had him moving. She waited until he'd squeezed his considerable bulk into the cramped space before pulling a curtain across it. Then she schooled her features and opened the door. Mara stood on her threshold, the beta female who served as the pack's healer and Lyra's longtime tormentor. You weren't at dawn gathering, Mara said, pushing past Lyra uninvited. Her sharp eyes swept the cottage, taking in the rumpled bed, the extra bowl by the hearth. Kai was sick. I stayed with him. So I heard. Mara moved to the cot where Kai watched with wide eyes. Fever, they said. Strange how it broke so quickly. She picked up the empty vial of moonbell tincture, examined it. You went to the forest. After dark. Alone. It wasn't a question. My brother needed medicine, Lyra said carefully. Did you see anything unusual? The patrol found blood. Lots of it. And tracks leading toward this part of the settlement. Lyra's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I gathered herbs and came home. That's all. Mara's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, and Lyra saw her nostrils flare slightly. Scenting. But what could she smell? Lyra had washed after tending Theron's wounds, and they'd only been in contact for hours, not days. There's something different about you, Mara said slowly. I can't quite place it. Behind the curtain, Lyra sensed rather than heard Theron's tension ratcheting higher. I don't know what you mean, Lyra said. Alpha Cordovan is very interested in the blood trail, very interested in what, or who, might have been wounded badly enough to leave such a path. Mara paused meaningfully. There are rumors, you know, about the Northern Territories, about their king. Lyra forced herself not to react. What about him? That he's gone missing. That there was an attack during the peace summit. That several packs are now searching for either the Northern King himself or his body. Mara smiled coldly. Wouldn't it be something if he turned up here? The reward would be substantial. I wouldn't know anything about that, Lyra said. No, I suppose you wouldn't. A weak little Omega like you. Mara moved toward the door, then paused. But if you should happen to see anything unusual, you'll report it immediately. Won't you? Of course. After Mara left, Lyra stood frozen for a full minute, listening to retreating footsteps. Only when she was certain they were alone did she move to release Theron from his hiding place. He emerged with murder in his fierce gaze. She was fishing, Lyra whispered, looking for any excuse to accuse me, and she mentioned... She broke off, staring at him with dawning horror. The Northern King. They're searching for the Northern King. Theron's expression was unreadable, but he didn't deny it. Are you? Lyra couldn't even finish the question. Tell me you're not him. Tell me I didn't hide the most feared alpha in 5 territories in my cottage. His silence was answer enough. Oh gods. Lyra pressed her hands to her face. Oh gods. Do you have any idea what they'll do to me if they find out? To Kai. Won't let. Theron's voice was fierce, absolute. He crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her hands away from her face, forcing her to look at him. His grasp of her language was improving hour by hour, as if proximity to her was helping him learn. Protected. Both. My word. Your word? Lyra laughed, a touch of hysteria in the sound. You're him, aren't you? The Ruthless King. The Alpha who united the northern packs by force, who conquered territories and crushed rebellions without mercy. Why would you protect us? Theron's hands moved to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone so deadly. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough with emotion, and the words came more smoothly than before. Because you saved me, used forbidden magic. When could walk away? Because you're mine, and I protect. What's mine? I'm not yours, Lyra protested weakly. Yes, he said simply. Our new moment I woke. Smelled your scent, felt your power, in my veins. You healed me, Omega. Bonded us. Can't you feel it? And she could. That thread of connection, growing stronger every hour they spent together. The way her nature sang in his presence. The way her body responded to his nearness with a hunger she'd never experienced before. This is insane, she whispered. Yes. His thumb brushed across her lips, watching the movement with predatory focus. But true. From the cot, Kai's small voice broke the tension. Mama? Is the king going to stay for breakfast? The absurdity of the question, of this entire situation, made Lyra want to laugh and cry simultaneously. Theron's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Hungry, he admitted, his comfort with her language growing with each exchange. Lyra fed them both, thin porridge and dried fruit, all she had, and watched Theron eat with single-minded focus. His table manners were surprisingly refined, she noted, evidence of a noble upbringing beneath all that violence. Why were you here? She asked as Kai dozed off again, still recovering from his illness. In Blackwater territory, we're nobody, insignificant. Why would the Northern King be anywhere near our borders? Theron's expression darkened. Peace summit. 5 territories. Trying. End the war. He touched his chest and shoulder, where the poisoned wounds lay beneath fresh bandages. Someone didn't want peace. The poison, Lyra said, understanding dawning. Someone at the summit tried to kill you. Succeeded. Almost. His intense stare met hers. Would have, without you. What kind of poison was it? I've never seen anything like those black veins. Nightshade, mixed with silver dust, and wolfsbane. Ancient recipe. Forbidden. His jaw clenched, anger flashing in his eyes. Only few know how to make. Someone close. Someone trusted. Betrayal. Just as he'd said in the forest. Your own people tried to kill you, Lyra whispered, horror and sympathy warring in her chest. Don't know who, yet, but will find out. The promise in his voice was chilling. And when I do... He didn't need to finish. Lyra had heard the stories about the Northern King's justice. Swift, brutal, absolute. How long before your pack realizes you're alive? She asked. Already know. Probably. Can feel me. Through pack bonds. No, I'm not dead, but can't pinpoint location. Not this distance. He studied her cottage, clearly calculating. Safe here. For now. Few days. Maybe more. A few days? Lyra's voice rose. You think we can hide the most wanted alpha in 5 territories in my one-room cottage for days? Have Better idea? She didn't. And that was the terrifying part. Over the next hours, Lyra learned things about the Northern King that contradicted everything she'd heard. He was patient with Kai, answering the boy's endless questions through gesture and increasingly confident words. He insisted on helping despite his injuries, bringing in firewood, repairing her broken chair, fixing the shutter that had hung crooked for months. "You should rest," she kept insisting. "Heal faster. Moving," was his constant reply, and she had to admit he was right. His wounds were closing at an unnatural rate. By afternoon, he'd removed his bandages to reveal wounds that had closed almost completely. The accelerated healing was extraordinary even for an alpha. "Royal bloodline," he explained when he caught her staring, his language skills noticeably stronger. Stronger, faster, harder, to kill. "Is that why they used poison instead of claws?" "Yes. And why left me for dead instead of finishing? Poison should have killed me in hours." He looked at her with something like wonder. "But your magic burned it away. Shouldn't be possible." "My grandmother said our line had power," Lyra admitted quietly. "That we were descended from the old healers before the purges. But I've never used it on anything like that poison before. Because you're strong. Stronger than, you know?" Theron moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. His words came more fluently now. "They keep you weak. On purpose, yes? This pack. Keep you down. Make you believe you're nothing." Lyra looked away, uncomfortable with how easily he'd seen through her entire life. "I'm an Omega. That's how it works." "No." His finger under her chin forced her to meet his heated look. "That's how cruel packs work. My pack." He paused, searching for the right words, finding them more easily now. "Omega sacred, precious, protected. Never shamed." "Your pack sounds like a fantasy." "Come see," he said simply, his accent still present but his grammar improving by the hour. "When this is done, come north. With me. You and Kai." Lyra's heart stuttered. "You can't mean that." "Mean everything, I say." His hand moved to cup her neck, his thumb resting near her mating gland. "Want you. Want Kai. Safe. Want to show you what life could be." The promise in his words, in his touch, made something inside her ache with longing. She found herself leaning into his warmth, into the strength he offered so freely. Theron's other hand came up to frame her face, tilting it up toward his. His eyes had darkened, the amber deepening to burnished gold. "Let me," he began, his voice rough with restrained need. And then she understood what he wanted, to deepen the bond between them, to mark her properly, not just with scent, but with intention. Before she could answer, voices outside made them both freeze. "Tracks definitely led this way. Omega lives here, the strange one. Alpha Cordovan wants her questioned again." Theron's entire body went rigid with protective fury. "How many exits?" "Just the door and one window and back." Lyra's mind raced. "They're going to search more thoroughly this time. If they find you..." "Won't." He was already moving toward the back window with predator grace. "I go. Lead them away from you." "No." The word burst from her before she could stop it. "They'll kill you. You're still healing." "We'll manage." His eyes met hers, fierce and determined. "Keep Kai safe. Hide the knife. Say nothing." The pounding at the door grew louder. "Lyra! Open this door now!" Theron pressed one fierce kiss to her forehead, a promise and a goodbye. "Come back. For you. Both. I swear it." Then he was gone, slipping out the window and disappearing into the forest shadows with barely a sound. Lyra took a shaking breath, hid Theron's knife beneath loose floorboards, and opened the door. Alpha Cordovan stood there with 6 guards this time, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "You're coming with us," he said without preamble, grabbing her arm roughly. "Questions need answering." "Kai!" Lyra pulled against his grip, looking desperately toward her brother. "I can't leave my brother alone." "The boy comes too," Cordovan said coldly, "to the pack house where he can be properly watched." As they dragged her from her cottage, one guard carrying a protesting Kai, Lyra felt the thread connecting her to Theron pull taut with distance. It didn't hurt yet, but she could feel the tension building, like a rope slowly fraying. They took her to a windowless room in the pack house where they questioned her for hours. The same questions, over and over, trying to catch her in a lie. Had she seen anyone in the forest? Number? Had anyone come to her cottage? Just Mara that morning. Did she know anything about the blood trail? Only what the patrol had said. By late afternoon, they seemed satisfied she was just a weak Omega who knew nothing useful. But Cordovan wasn't done with her yet. "You'll stay in the holding cell tonight," he announced, "until we're certain no one is coming back for you." "Please," Lyra begged, "at least tell me where Kai is. Let me see him." "The boy is fine. He's being fed and cared for." Cordovan's smile was cold. "Better than you've been able to provide, I'd wager." They threw her into the pack's holding cell, little more than a pit in the ground with iron bars over the top. Lyra huddled in the corner as daylight faded, her mind racing with worry. Was Theron safe? Had he made it far enough away? And Kai? Was he truly being cared for? Or was that just another of Cordovan's cruelties? The hours crawled by. Above ground, she could hear the pack going about their evening routines. Dinner smells wafted down, making her stomach growl, but no one brought her food or water. As full darkness settled, Lyra felt the bond to Theron begin to ache. Not painful yet, but a hollow feeling in her chest, like something essential was missing. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried not to think about what would happen if they caught him. Just as she was beginning to doze from exhaustion, a scream cut through the night air. High, terrified, distinctly female. Lyra jerked awake, pressing herself against the earthen wall of her cell. Above ground, the village erupted into chaos. "Rabid wolves!" someone yelled. "At the forest edge!" 3 of them. Running feet, shouting, the clash of weapons. And then, another scream. Mara's voice, shrill with terror. "Help! Someone help me!" Lyra strained to hear what was happening. More shouting, guards mobilizing. Then sudden silence, followed by gasps of shock. "What in the gods' names?" a guard's voice said. "He killed them," someone else breathed. "All 3, with his bare hands." "Who is that?" another voice demanded. "Identify yourself." Lyra's blood ran cold. Number. He'd come back. Theron had come back despite knowing it was dangerous, drawn by the threat to the pack, or perhaps drawn by her, by the bond pulling him back to his mate. She heard Mara's voice again, but no longer terrified, triumphant. "It's him! The stranger from before. I told you there was someone." "Surround him!" Cordovan's voice boomed. "Don't let him escape." "Alpha, you don't understand," a younger guard's voice said nervously. He's changing." The snarl that echoed through the night was inhuman, savage, the sound of a predator defending its territory. "Sweet gods," someone whispered. "What is he?" "I know exactly what he is," Mara said, her voice carrying clearly. "That's the Northern King. The Ruthless King himself." Silence fell like a hammer blow. Then Cordovan's voice, savage with triumph. "Take him! Use the silver chains. The sounds of fighting erupted. Snarls and roars that didn't sound human, the clash of weapons, men screaming. It went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, silence again. "We have him," a guard called out, breathing hard. "The silver's burning him. He can't shift." Good. Cordovan's satisfaction was palpable. "Bind him thoroughly. We'll execute him at dawn and bring the Omega up. I want her to see what happens to those who dare enter our territory." Number. No, no, no. Rough hands hauled Lyra from the pit, her eyes adjusted to torchlight to see a nightmare scene. Theron knelt in the center of the village square, silver chains wrapped around his wrists, neck, and torso. Blood streamed from his shoulder and chest where his wounds had reopened during the fight. Around him lay the bodies of 3 wolves, their necks broken. He'd saved them, saved Mara and whoever else those rabid beasts would have killed, and this was his reward. But what made her breath catch was his eyes. No longer amber, but blazing gold, his wolf nature barely contained beneath his skin despite the silver burning him. Those golden eyes found hers across the square, and she saw anguish there, apology, love. He'd come back for her, despite knowing it was a trap, despite the danger. He'd come back. "Look at him," Cordovan said, forcing Lyra's face toward Theron. "This is what happens to northern savages who dare enter our territory." He raised his voice to address the gathered pack. "At dawn, we execute him. His death will send a message to the northern territories. Blackwater bows to no king." The pack roared its approval, bloodthirsty and eager. Lyra tried to run to Theron, but guards held her back. "No. You don't understand. He saved Mara. Those wolves were rabid." "Quiet." Cordovan backhanded her, sending her sprawling. "You're lucky we don't execute you alongside him for harboring an enemy. The only reason you still live is because we can't prove you knew who he was." They dragged her back toward the holding cell as she screamed Theron's name. The last thing she saw before they threw her back in the pit was Theron straining against his chains. Those golden eyes locked on her with desperate fury, silver smoke rising from his skin where the chains burned. Alone in the darkness, Lyra pressed her face to the damp earth. The scream that tore from her throat wasn't entirely human. It was grief and rage and desperate need, amplified by the power she'd spent her whole life hiding. The ground trembled beneath her. The iron bars groaned ominously. Cracks appeared in the earthen walls of her prison. And she felt it. That connection to Theron, that incomplete bond forged when she'd healed him with her forbidden magic. It was pulling at her, demanding completion. Without him, she was dying. With him chained and condemned, they were both dying. Deep inside her, something ancient stirred. The power she'd always feared, always suppressed. Her grandmother's gifts, and her grandmother's grandmother's, stretching back to the old healers before the purges. They'd told her to hide it, to fear it, to never let it free. But her mate was dying, and she would burn the whole world down before she let them take him from her. Above ground, locked in silver chains that burned his skin like acid, Theron lifted his head. Even through the agony of silver poisoning, he heard his Omega's anguished cry. The wolf inside him, usually under his iron control, roared for freedom. The chains creaked under the strain of his fury, and deep in the forest surrounding the village, dozens of wolves emerged from the shadows. They'd been tracking their king for days, following the faint pull of the pack bond north into enemy territory. They'd held back, waiting for his signal, giving him time to complete whatever mission had brought him here. But now their king was in chains. They could feel his pain, his rage, through the bonds that connected every wolf in his pack. The northern pack had found their king, and they were done waiting. Silent as death, they began to encircle the village. 50 strong, 100, more still coming through the trees. In the holding cell, Lyra felt the earth respond to her power, felt magic she'd never dared touch rising through the ground beneath her, ancient and vast. She looked up at the iron bars, at the guards standing watch above, and she smiled. Dawn would bring an execution, Cordovan had promised. But dawn would also bring war.